Hey guys, it's Maddie and welcome back to my channel. Grab yourself a drink and let's talk about the 8 books I read in April. We start off this month with a reread, and that was me rereading Fourth Wing. I also annotated this book, and this was my first time annotating anything, and it was so much fun. Like, look at all those tabs. It is so satisfying to see. I did start labeling my tabs, but then as I went on, I started getting more colors and I kind of just stopped labeling what each color meant. But like if I flip through to one of the pages, I'll understand what I'm getting at and why it's important and why it has that color. But this is a 5-star read for me. I do have a whole video dedicated to this book, but this is Rebecca Yarros's debut into romantasy. We are in a war college and our main character Violet enters the Riders Squad, the Riders Quadrant, and she meets this guy Xaden, who their families have a very intense background because of a rebellion that was brought up, and Xaden and Violet are like destined enemies. Her mom actually killed Xaden's dad, so there's bad blood between them, but as this book is, it's an enemies to lovers. And the romance in this book, the frickin' dragons, the war college, the friendships. Did I mention there's dragons? And I love everything about this book. It is my favorite book of all time. I can't say enough good things about it. But there is a lot more going on in the backgrounds than we as readers know about. So we follow Violet and Xaden as they work on their own personal issues, but also work on big political issues as well. This book also had me crying at the very end. Like, it rips your heart out. It really, you grow to love the characters because they're so well-rounded in the magical elements. So these characters have what's called a signet, which is manifested through their dragon to themselves, and that is how they are able to produce the magic. And their signet reflects who they are at their core. So Xaden, he's all dark and mysterious. We don't really know much about him. He has a lot of secrets. So he's a shadow wielder because he has a lot of dark areas in himself. And Violet, she has the signet of a lightning wielder. So she can cause destruction. She's kind of like a little bit of a loose cannon. She struggles with expressing her signet for quite a while and learning how to get a hold on it. And chapter 30, I think. Oh. It is a spicy chapter, to say the least. Anyways, like I mentioned, this is a 5-star read for me. The second book I finished was Butcher and Blackbird, and this is a dark romantic comedy, and this book had me laughing out loud so many times, and it had me all giddy. We follow 2 murderers, and they are serial killers of serial killers. So Sloane and Rowan are our main characters, and we get both of their POVs in this book. And essentially they hunt serial killers. At first they're like 2 separate killers. They do their own thing for the first little bit, and then as fate would have it, they get brought together, and then they start this game where they once a year get together and hunt down a specific serial killer, and whoever wins gets a point basically. And of course, when you're dealing with serial killers, nothing goes according to plan. So they find themselves in some sticky situations that they need to rely on one another to get out of. And I love Rowan. He is an Irish man, and he is so unapologetically in love with Sloane right from the very beginning. Like, he professes this, and he is just so out there with how he feels. Like, he falls first, and Sloane's a little bit more reserved and a little more timid about letting herself be emotional and get into a relationship with Rowan. They live on 2 completely different sides of the states, so they also have a long distance relationship that they're trying to figure out as well. There's a lot of mystery to it. It is very intense in some scenes. There is a big trigger warning at the beginning of this book, so definitely check it out. But it's not super gruesome and heavy, I would say. Like, yeah, some parts go into detail about the murdering of people and how they go about it, but it's done in a lighthearted way where it didn't feel very dark and twisted, even though it's a dark romance. I don't know, there's just something about it that made it more lighthearted, and I think it's like the comedic aspect of it. Sloane has a friend named Lark, and Rowan has a brother who's a leather craftsman. That's what he does by trade. So there is actually the second book of this trilogy coming out in the next couple of months actually, and it's called Leather and Lark. and I believe it is going to follow them. The people in Sloane and Rowan's life, like the close people, they know what they do. They know that they're murderer. They know that they have this dark, twisted game, and they just feed off of each other. And the spice in this book was perfect. The chemistry between the two characters was, oh, it was so great. There was something, a little bit of depth missing to the characters, I would say. Like, it was a very lighthearted rom-com for me, so that's why it is only a 4-star. But I love this book. It was such a great read. It was one of my most anticipated reads of this year. The third book of this month was The Wall of Winnipeg by Mariana Zapata, I think is how you pronounce her name. This book I have a very hard time rating because this was one of my first fiction audiobooks I've listened to, and there is a little bit of smut. It's like an enemies to lovers. And some parts of the audiobook were so cringy, and I'm like, I think this would have been better if I read it versus hearing people say it. There's just something a little bit off about hearing what I wish I read instead. I hope that makes sense, but some things I'm like, ew, like hearing someone say that, like, cringe, no thank you. But anyways, we follow Aiden Graves, who is this professional NFL player from Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is in Canada. And he goes down to the States, I think to like Nashville or Texas. No, Tennessee. He goes down to Tennessee and he has this personal assistant named Vanessa. And Aiden is a huge asshole. Like, he is such a dick. He is so closed off. He is like very rude to her. Talks very minimally, doesn't open up or share anything with her. Like, Vanessa tries to have conversations and to get to know him more on a personal level versus just like strictly professional, and he shuts down every single attempt. So she quits. Like, she isn't happy there. Like, he doesn't make the job enjoyable. He's not very personable, so she's like, screw it, I'm out. I worked here long enough, I can move on with my life, go do things I want to do, work on my own passions, and I don't need to have an asshole of a boss. But then Aiden finds himself in a sticky situation, so then he comes crawling back to Vanessa asking this big huge favor of her, and what he offers her in return, like as payment, is pretty irresistible, and I would have a very hard time saying no. In fact, I don't think I would say no to what he was offering, and then they have to work on their dynamic throughout. And Vanessa annoyed me as well. She was kind of whiny and always going back on what she was doing. Like, she would make a decision and then doubt it. And like, even when she finally decided what to do, the whole time she's like, well, I don't know. Like, I don't know. And I'm just like, okay, woman, you made your bed, now lie in it and make the most of what you're doing, which she does in the end. But to get there, it was like pulling teeth. And like, Aiden only became like a real person and only treated Vanessa like a person when he needed something. And like, she's a sucker for saying yes. Like, she was so hard on about not associating with him anymore, like cutting him out of her life and like moving on. And then like, the relationship just didn't seem very believable to me. Like, he was just such an asshole in the beginning. Like, I don't know how she could go back to that. And she holds on, like, she has a lot of resentment for her own family. So I'm like, why does he get the free pass if you hold your family so accountable? Why does he get away with so much? Anyways, that's neither here nor there. Aiden has a roommate named Zach, and Vanessa calls him Big Texas. Some of the nicknames that Vanessa comes up with people, like, she calls Aiden Big Guy a lot. And I'm just like, would this have been better if I read it? Quite possibly, but hearing it, I'm like, that's not cute or charming. It just doesn't do it for me. But I really liked Zach as a character. He was very funny. I was excited when he was like in chapters. But in conclusion, this book was only a 3-star read for me. Maybe I might want to reread it because all the reviews on Goodreads were really positive, and people are like, oh, this is my comfort book. Like, I loved it. Like, oh my gosh, like, slay. And I'm like, did we read the same book? Because I don't feel that way. Oh, yes. Now we get to A Little Life. I actually didn't finish this book. I have a whole video review on it posted on my channel. I think I got to like 60% through. But this book, oh my gosh, it was a library book, so I don't have it with me, but it was a fat book, and it's like very heavy if you know anything about A Little Life. We followed this group of 4 college students throughout, not so much throughout college, but like there's a lot of flashbacks, but more about their adult life and how they're moving on from college, how the real world is impacting them. They live in New York, and just how they survive as adults We zoom in more on this one character named Jude, who has this horrific past, goes through a lot of traumas in his life, and we see that come up in how he acts now and how he reacts to situations, how he struggles with relationships, struggles at his job, struggles connecting with people, and how like physically he struggles as well because his body is like failing him. It's a very heavy book, but I rate it 4 stars because we get to know the characters on such a deep emotional level that they feel like real people. Like it felt like I could have been reading a memoir. Just the little nitty-gritty details we know about each character and how complex and flushed out their background stories are, like the back and forth jumping of a timeline, it makes sense and everything just compiles into what it is now. It's a very intense book. It is so beautifully written, but it's a lot. And that's why I only finished 60%. I will go back and finish this book definitely at some point, but at this point I'm like, I need to step back. I need a bit of a break. I need to go read some lighthearted, some smut, because it's just a very sad book. There are happy points to it. There are definitely ebbs and flows, like as anyone's life is, but the lows are very, very intense. How many times can I say the word intense? My gosh. But yeah, this book was 4 stars for me. Just because at some points I felt like maybe we got a little bit too much detail or things just weren't progressing as I wish they were, felt a little stuck and a little slow. But overall, it was a really great, impactful book. The next book I listened to, again, an audiobook. I listened on the Libby app because you can get your books through the library and then listen to it on Libby, was Only Say Good Things. And this is Crystal Harris's memoir. For those of you who don't know, Crystal Hefner was a girlfriend of Hugh Hefner, the founder, CEO of Playboy. And then she ended up marrying him and became his wife. But she has a very interesting story. And I don't know how much I want to get into it because I'm not a huge Crystal fan. I think she is an interesting person with an interesting outlook on life, but I just don't think she was in Playboy for the right reasons. I mean, you can't judge that. You don't know for sure, but I just think she used Hef a lot, and I know this is very controversial, but I don't like her. And I know that doesn't matter. Like, I don't want that. Like, who cares if I like Crystal Hefner? Like, she's freaking Crystal Hefner. My opinion about her does not matter whatsoever, but I had a hard time listening to her book just because I am a big fan of Holly Madison and Bridget Marquardt, and they have a very different view on things than Crystal does. And I just think that Crystal went in at the end of Hugh's life, knew what she was doing, got her money, and then dipped. Like when he proposed, she accepted, but then ran out and then came back and married him. And I just think she is like a bit of a twisted person, and I don't have a whole lot of respect for her. Again, who cares what I have to say, but those are just my thoughts on her book. And she also had a lot go on in her early childhood, and that definitely impacted her now and impacted how she had relationships. But it always circled back to her dad dying and to her first love dying. Like, it always came back to that, and it was just like, I don't know, it was weird. But again, one of my favorite things about audiobooks, especially listening to memoirs, is that you get to hear, most times it's the person saying their own story, which I loved. I think Crystal is a very well-spoken woman and compiled her experiences in a very interesting way, but the content of her book, I was like, not for me. But not everything has to be for me, and she didn't write that book for me. The next book I finished is Bride by Ali Hazelwood, and I also have a full video talking about this on my channel as well. We follow our main character, Misery Lark, who is a vampire, and she is set to marry the alpha werewolf Lo. There's a big divide between the vampires and the werewolves, and they're hoping that this marriage will kind of bind the two species and create some common ground. And essentially Misery is sent there as collateral. Not essentially, she is. It's spoken outright that Misery is sent there as collateral because the werewolves then have to send one of their own to the vampires. And it's not a safe place for Misery in there because the species hate each other and they are responsible for a lot of deaths on both sides, and it's just a bit of a shit show, but Misery is trying to make the most of it. She's trying to find some acquaintances within the werewolves, but then her friend Serena goes missing and she's led to believe that the werewolves have something to do with it. So that is like the final push she needs to accept this marriage proposal from Lo, which it doesn't really come from him, it more so comes from her dad, but whatever. I really enjoyed this book. I really liked Misery and I liked Lo. I thought their banter was really good, and he takes protecting his own so seriously. Like he is the alpha werewolf. Like, that's hot. This was my first book in the Omegaverse, so there was some scenes where I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Okay. But yeah, it was a little eye-opening, especially like the spicy smut scenes. There's also a kid in this book, and I haven't read too many books where there is a child that we interact with and see her view of things, which I could appreciate. She wasn't a huge character in the book, but I think she was written very well. Some parts of this book did drag on for me a little bit, and some things, not that they didn't make sense, but I'm just like, why is that a thing? But for the most part, it was a great book. It was super short, really easy to get through. The characters were all very likable. I don't really have too much to say about this. One thing I do want to finish this out with is I hope this becomes a series because I feel like there is so much more we could get into. I know people said this was like very like Wattpad-like, and I definitely agree. Like, there were big plot points that weren't flushed out, and we didn't get a lot of background information to it, but that's what makes it feel like a Wattpad. Like, it just happens and you take it for what it is. So that's why I hope there is a second book, because there is so much more you could do with this, I think, and I really hope Ali Hazelwood continues it. I would read it. I would read it in a heartbeat. But Bride is a 4-star read for me. The second to last book I listened to again. This was a big audiobook month for me, and that is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. I have a whole video about this again. It's by Mark Manson, and he actually narrates the audiobook as well. And it's essentially about not giving a fuck, about letting go of things that you care about that are holding you back, not caring about what other people think of you. There is so much more to it, and I had the whole video. I don't want to really get into it here because I just don't think I will be able to efficiently talk about this book in a few sentences, but I highly recommend, especially if you're a people pleaser or if you are concerned with what people think of you, about caring about things that you don't want to be, that are exhausting you, just things that don't align with the life that you want to live. The audiobook was super short. I think it was like 5 hours long, so I'm assuming the book is also really short. Well, it would have to be. Duh. But yeah, I really recommend it. And this has been a book that's been on my list for quite a while to read, and I did start it at one point, but I didn't finish it. It's like, as the title would ensue, there's a lot of swearing to it, so know that going into it. Some things I felt were a little long-winded and lost me a bit, but that's also because I was doing things as I was listening to it, so I didn't have like my 100% undivided attention, so I probably missed a bunch of things, and I would love to do a reread of it with a physical copy. And to close out the month of April, the last book I read was First Lie Wins by Ashley Elston, and this is a thriller. We follow our con artist, Evie, as she is sent by this elusive Mr. Smith. We don't know who Mr. Smith is. He's like this big Kumba fella who dictates and runs this con artist business and gets these other people to do his dirty work, essentially. So she is tasked with forming a relationship with this guy named Ryan, who has some sketchy business ventures. She is to befriend him and get information on like his financial details of the business, what he's actually doing, and she doesn't know why. Like, he never really says why she's completing the tasks that she is, but she just knows she needs to get the information. But Evie is put on alarm when a girl shows up using Evie's real identity, like her real name, all of the background details match up. So then she starts to question everything. She starts to question the business of Mr. Smith, what's actually going on, who can she trust, is Ryan plotting against her, like who knows what information, essentially. I do also have a full video on this, so if you're interested in more details, definitely go check that out. But in conclusion, I give this book 3.5 stars. Well, it was really enjoyable. It was a super quick, short read. Like, it moved pretty quickly. Some of the things just don't make sense to me, how all of it worked out and how, like, the logistics of it. It just wasn't very realistic in my opinion, and it wasn't very convincing. Anyways, that is all for this video. Those were my 8 books of April. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye!